Hello, English 290 surf enthusiasts, and welcome to your Tuesday update. Hopefully, your weekend has gone well. I had a little rough start to mine, a little injured, a little sore. That's why you can see I'm out here currently in what I consider to be my outdoor office, aka I'm not allowed to do this in the house because my wife is also working, and you know, one of us had to go outside. Not sure how we figured out it would be me, but here we are. And I'm a little stiff too because, well, over the weekend, we got a little rowdy in my house. My wife asked me if I could clear the kitchen table after dinner. I needed a running head start, but I made it. Okay, here's what you need to know. This week, right, we are probably more than likely going to be in class together again, face to face, or at least masked face to masked face, on Thursday. For now, I just wanted to give the university time to run its procedures and run the course of all that makes life interesting in these COVID days. Hooray. In the meantime, life continues on for us, and so it does for you. You have the London and Cook response to look at, which we'll go through here in a second on the Canvas page. Ultimately, the questions that I'm asking you are very similar to the same questions I asked you about Farber, and that we originally started with the poems from the Romantics and Philip Larkin. Um, this time, though, since we are sort of doing the same question, we're going to be asking for just a little bit more oomph in your responses and your notation of evidence, right? Some of you had plenty, some of you just latched on to one or two, and that was fine. It was a first time out, first foray into answering that kind of question, perhaps for some of you, and so there wasn't a whole lot of expectation. But now that you've done it once, we're going to raise the expectation a little bit. Not grossly, but right? Quality work. So if you have concerns about that, you have an opportunity to get some of those answered. At our usual class time at 2 o'clock on Tuesday, we're going to have a Zoom meeting. You should have found the invitation to that in the announcement where this is contained, as well as a separate email which I sent just to make sure that it went through. We'll open that Zoom announcement with just questions that you have about this particular assignment, and then the ones that I'm going to assign for Thursday as well. And then we're going to use the rest of that little bit of Zoom time to talk about your first upcoming major assignment and kind of what that looks like and what it's about. And we'll talk about it continuously as we sort of build towards it each session. But, it's time to introduce it because time waits for no man or woman. And so now's the time. Other than that, that should be a relatively easy virtual day. So without too much further ado, let's take a look at the assignment for Cook and for London together now. Okay, English 290, here you go. You can see it. Here's week 2. This is not due, obviously, until Thursday, so we'll get to that in a second. This is what you need for Tuesday. You are to read the excerpt from Cook and his voyage to the Pacific and the excerpt from London and his cruise of the Snark. Right? And you have ultimately two things to consider, or two parts to your response, and you can post them right here in Canvas. I think I've got it set here, yes I do, as a file upload. So you'll need your Word doc this way that I can respond to in comments on your doc as we move through it. So you need a doc or docx, .doc or .docx from Microsoft Word in order to upload this. Let's look at the first. I've asked you to defend Cook's account as an example of the exotic picaresque or wanderlust, and London's account of it as an example of Bildungsroman, right? So there's some distinction between how these two are portrayed, right? Then, considering the language and style of each, and use examples as appropriate, how do these two works resonate with those ideas of wanderlust and self-realization of modern surf culture? In other words, what tropes or evocations associated with the romantic movements in art and philosophy are being applied to surfing and its discovery in these selections? How do these things work? And you don't have to keep it as just romantic, right? Clearly, this, as you'll learn down here, has some premeditated interest behind it. What is it? I'm glad you asked. read this next to be able to handle this part, which says, from our current position and context in society and these pages, what additional facets of surfing can we read in these accounts? And then I've given you some things to focus on. To know what this is, right, you only have to know where you are in the popular topics and issues of our day as far as culture identification and culture incorporation, accommodation, appropriation go. Right? What things do we borrow? What happens when we borrow certain things? That kind of stuff. A little bit more about that in particular to surfing in the conclusion part of this video that follows. But basically, this is what you have for Tuesday, in addition to the Zoom meeting, which hopefully you found in one of 2 emails I sent you. So please look for that again, and I will hopefully see all of your smiling faces, maskless possibly, depending on where you are. Do so safely, via Zoom. And then Thursday, we'll be back in good old Hoggard, sitting around computer desks, pretending to do ultimately scientific stuff. Right? Okay. So take a look at this, read both of these, give them some thought, not just in terms of how romantic they are, but also kind of what tropes and ideas they sort of reinforce and belie, what kind of characteristics are they ingraining into surf culture as early examples of surf tourism and literature. And then read this, and then reflect back on these two. Right now, how does this stuff look? You can handle this in 2 parts distinctly, right? Response 1, response 2, or you can sort of treat them together, just be clear when you're doing which. However you want to format it is entirely up to you. Just make sure you cover both these 2 things. Okay. Now what short follows is a little discussion about how this stuff reflects on this stuff in case you need it, and that's it. Okay, I think a couple of things are worth noting here before I turn you loose to try this on your own. And the first is that Captain Cook himself does not actually make this observation, right? It's from one of his crew member, and so it becomes interesting that we attribute this to him as though he wrote it down. Clearly, if you're on the ship, you're going to give the captain the credit, or else you might not find a way home, at least not one that would be enjoyable or comfortable if you get home at all. So yes, he has to credit the captain, but it also sort of sets up an unrealistic and unreal expectation. Yeah, that's mincing words and being particular, but that's what we do in academia, right? I mean, you've already set up a grounding observation as something that's a lie. 2, look at the way that London does his work, right? The way the language and the style works is increasingly masculine and very aggressive and very emboldened, right? Coupled with the readings from Westwick and Nuschel, it's also a bit racist in its endeavor. And if nothing else, it's the very first example that we have of surf tourism literature. So from the very beginning, we have this unique tie between surfing and the Western world's appreciation of it as a tourist attraction or a sport, leisure tourism and travel. The use of surfing in such a way continues to this very day, right? Probably a number of you have been and or may plan a trip at some point to Costa Rica. Clearly a great example of that. Maybe you've been to Hawaii, another great example of that. Westwick and Nuschel did that one in detail. Pretty much any coastal city. I mean, that's kind of how we advertise UNCW by the sea, right? UNC by the sea, the dub, right? Sort of the same. So it's kind of interesting to look at how closely tied surfing becomes to tourism and travel and sort of this sense of wanderlust, which brings me to my next little tip. Wanderlust is simply, as you would imagine, the same as sort of the exotic picaresque. You can kind of use the 2 interchangeably. It's this idea that the great blue beyond and wonders that are out there are waiting to be had and are untouched and can remain so even after we've been there and gone through. Sadly, as we learned from Westwick and Nuschel, that's not always the way, and nor is it really the calling. Usually, sometimes it's much more economical than that. Be that as it may, that is still a very prominent trope of surfing, that of the wanderlust, right? It's what drives us to far-flung coasts under banana-thatched palm trees to try to chase down a wave that maybe no one else has surfed or very few surf, and you and just your buddy are one of the only two there, right? Or you and your significant other are the only two to walk the beach at sunset together after a morning surf or an afternoon cool-off surf, right? That sense of wanderlust, present in both, right? So from the very beginning, we have these sort of tropes and ideas solidified. That is that the surfer is a traveler, and a traveler of places far flung, and usually less well developed, at least by point of GDP, like gross domestic product, and how you would actually rate first, second, or third world sort of situations, right? Surfers are usually going to those places that are not necessarily on the map in the sense of they're noted, right? Usually if it's crowded and well blown up, the knock is don't go there. There was a time when Costa Rica was dead and Nicaragua was the new Costa Rica. And now both of them are probably equally well traveled, though some spots are still pretty remote in both. You can get to either with relatively no struggle, right? How does all that get the ball rolling? Well, surfers and coincidentally yogis, odd pairing, but it's true, and often European travelers are some of the ones that are first there, right? Why? Well, because of the waves and that sense of wanderlust and that sense of Bildungsroman, right? Challenge the ocean, be the winner. I think you'll find all of that wrapped up in both of those readings, and sort of the underlying 20th century causations come in that reading from Westwick and Neuschel. So make sure you give them all your attention, and then if you still have questions about your response on Tuesday, I'll be happy to handle those. If you're concerned about them, we can talk about those in class on Tuesday, and then the deadline for that response answer will be midnight on Tuesday. Then I'll show you what we got for Thursday and turn you loose. Okay? All right. That's about it. Hopefully you're all staying well and staying healthy. Again, look forward to seeing you Tuesday at 2 on the Zoom call. If you have any questions, I can answer them. Don't you hate it when people answer their own questions? I do. Think about it. You'll get it. All right. That's it. See you Tuesday at 2 via Zoom, and hopefully Thursday via mask to mask in class, Hoggard Hall. Stay well.